everyone. Welcome to episode 48 of Dollar Dialogue. Today, our discussion is pertaining China's economic puzzle, boom, bust, or reinvention. This is a very interesting topic where we will explore China's meteoric rise to success as one of Asia's tigers, and it's a tale of soaring ambition, mounting pressure, as well as global consequences. And we are very grateful to have a guest speaker today, Attila, who's from China, but he is currently studying at a boarding school in New Jersey, whom I met at Wharton, and he is very, very passionate and very intelligent when it comes to the field of finance, economics, and global politics. And Attila is a rising senior, and yeah, we're excited to have him today on our podcast. So before we start, Attila, would you like to say anything to the introduction that I've just said?
Good morning, guys. Good afternoon. Nice to meet you guys. This is my first time, and it's my pleasure to be here. So, yes, hope we have a good time. Thank you.
Uh, thank you, Attila. So for our introduction or our first segment, we'll first talk about the dragon's journey from poverty to power of China. So China has historically not been one of the richest countries in the world, and this isn't just a story of numbers or GDP charts. China is about a civilization that has lasted well over centuries, and it's rewritten the playbook on development, challenge Western or economic orthodoxy, and emerge as both a manufacturing superpower and a geopolitical heavyweight. So let's rewind. In 1980, China's GDP per capita was less than $200. In fact, it was, if I'm not mistaken, lesser than India. It was poorer than much of sub-Saharan Africa at the time. But after Deng Xiaoping's reforms, the nation took a bold leap from collectivism to socialism with Chinese characteristics. And the result, over 800 million people were lifted out of poverty. And this is according to the World Bank itself. And that's nearly 1 in 10 people on Earth. To provide some context, megacities like Shenzhen, once sleepy fishing towns, became global tech hubs. Rural villages were linked to the global economy via infrastructure, supply chains, and smartphones. And in less than 2 generations, China accounted for almost 30% of global manufacturing output, overtaking US as the factory of the world. But how did it happen? And what makes China's journey so fascinating and at times bewildering for young economics? And that's the reason. That's basically what we'll discuss for our segment one. So my question, or this is to Mr. Rishan Ali, Mr. Shazib Karim, or Mr. Attila. What do you think is the main reason for China's rise, economically speaking? Do you think like it's their shift to essentially state capitalism in 1980 under Deng Xiaoping, or do you think it's more about their global influence in manufacturing output?
So first of all, it's a great question. So, as you said, China got independence from 1949. It's I would say it's a really new company. I mean, country for China compared to other countries. It also faced many challenges. So, as you talk about it, Deng Xiaoping reforms, it really it actually reformed the Chinese economy from completely communism to socialism with Chinese characters. So we can compare it to North Korea, just objectively. You can see how the North Korea economy work. It's like completely closed. But China shift from communism to socialism with Chinese characters. So they kind of changed it, but they used it very well. So first, Deng Xiaoping introduced a market reform. So how it worked is he allowed private businesses, foreign investments, and price liberalization. So that I think this really boosts up the GDP by a lot and give people more confidence. And also he created special economic zones. I believe it called SEZs in place like Shenzhen, like you talk about. It used to be a small fish town. They use tax incentives and looser regulations. So it's just for in this period, GDP grows averagely like 9 to 10% annually for the future 30 plus years.
Thank you, Mr. Attila. That was very insightful. Mr. Rishan Ali, I see that your hand is raised. Would you also like to chime in?
Yeah, I agree with what Attila said. Yeah, and he brought up some good evidence. But I also think, I mean, it's not contradictory. I don't know what I said, but in addition to that, China also had a lot of manufacturing potential because it's of its large population and the where it is, right on the South China Sea, you can go to basically all of Asia from there, and it was a great positioning for a manufacturing country. So they had a lot of potential before all the reforms and all the manufacturing came in.
Thank you, Rishan. And also, before our podcast, we took a poll of questions, and one of the questions that was asked was that Bangladesh is very reliant on garments, as like 13% of our GDP is exports, and of those 13%, 80% of those exports are garments. So, Rishan, as someone who's very knowledgeable about the fields of garments, would you say Bangladesh is heavily reliant on China at this point?
I think China, yeah, I know about it from a garments perspective. China is not too big of a market share in, sorry, um, it's not a large percentage of our exports. So I think the US is like nearly up to 50%, and it's like 35 to 40% Europe, and then the rest is m most of the rest is China. So it's not even like 10%. So it's not that big of the garments exports.
Thank you, Mr. Rishan Ali, for that insightful response. So, bringing back to what Attila said, yes, in 1980, the year when Deng Xiaoping launched China's reform and opening up, the economy was barely functioning. GDP capita was around $150, and over 88% of the population lived in extreme poverty. In addition to that, some of the other factors was that life expectancy was around 66 years old, and literacy rates were below 70%. And China's global trade, it was in fact below 1% of world exports. But everything changed around that time period when Deng broke with Maoist orthodoxy. He shifted China away from central planning and towards market socialism. Rural communes were dismantled in favor of household responsibility system, allowing farmers to sell surplus crops. And the introduction of special economic zones in places like Shenzhen, as Attila mentioned, also opened the floodgates for foreign direct investment, technology transfer, and export-led growth. So between 1980 and 2010, the real GDP grew at an annual average rate of 10.3%, and this was the fastest sustained expansion of any economic growth in recorded world history. China became then the world's largest exporter by 2009, the top manufacturer in the world by 2010, and entered the World Trade Organization in 2001, which catalyzed another surge in global integration. And by 2023 data, China's GDP is 17.5 trillion. It might be more now, and GDP per capita is well over 12.5 thousand dollars per year, which is nearly 80 times higher than it was 4 decades earlier. And China's macroeconomic tool was anything but conventional. The People's Bank of China intervened heavily in foreign markets, holding the yuan undervalued to maintain export competitiveness, and it amassed over $3.2 trillion dollars in foreign reserves, the largest in the world, helping maintain a current account surplus of over 10% of GDP in peak years like 2007. Meanwhile, there's also gross capital formation, which is investments in fixed assets, and they reach 47% of GDP in 2011, and that's nearly double the US average. It financed airports, bullet trains, smart cities, and ghost towns. Between 2011 and 2013, China poured more cement than the US did in the entire 20th century. But this growth relied heavily on factor accumulation, not productivity. China benefited from a massive demographic dividend, with working age population making up over 70% of the total population of China, and over 500 million rural citizens migrated to urban centers, forming the largest urbanization wave in history. Labor was cheap, abundant, and mobile, a textbook strategy which was set up for comparative advantage in labor intensive exports. Yet, beneath this meteoric rise, some of the challenges that we are seeing today is inflation, and debt to GDP ratio is soaring from 140% in 2008 to over 300% by 2023, which is driven by local government financing vehicles and which are also known as LGFVs, and housing boom that now risk by implosion. Income inequality, as measured by the Gini coefficient, rose from 0.30 in 1980 to around 0.47 today, which is higher than many Western nations. And as China tries to climb up the global value chain, investing in AI, green tech, and chip fabrication, it faces the middle income trap, waning marginal returns, and an aging population. The total fertility rate dropped from 1.0 in 2023, one of the lowest in the world, suggesting that demographic dividend has sort of expired. And with that being said, this is clearly not necessarily a concern, but these are some of the facts that, economically speaking, has come up in regards to post Mao China. While the GDP has sort of grown tremendously and the people's lives are becoming better, there are somewhat concerns regarding inflation, but this is something all countries in the world face. So, based on this information, Mr. Shazib Karim, Mr. Rishan Ali, or Mr. Attila, what do you think will be some of the challenges in terms of economy that China might face in the coming decades? And do you think China will be able to sort of overcome that based on its population?
Yes, so you talk about the biggest challenge for China in the future decades. So I think one of the biggest challenge China will face in the coming decade is the middle income trap, a powerful economy ceiling that many fast-growing countries hit when their low-cost growth models run out of steam, but innovation and domestic demands aren't strongly enough to take over. Because as you can see, China grows rapidly in the last 30 years, maybe 40 years, whether on GDP or exports, everything like that. And we can also see the global power of China in the world. We can see second or top five country in the world. So, so more we talk about the middle income trap, it's when a country gets rich by being cheap, but can't stay rich without being smart. So it's kind of like a threat to China, but but we will see in the future. So it also wage rise, but productivity and innovation lag. So the economy stills before reaching high income stats. So I want to add one more point is we can't say the GDP growth of China is rapidly growing, but you also have to think about the rich and the poor gap is getting bigger and bigger because if you want to grow the GDP, people have to expense, they have to use money to spend on something. But you have to think about the minimum GDP, minimum wage in China. It's closely to three or some places like $4. So it's really low. So instead of spending, people more likely is gonna to save their money. So now you can see the growth of GDP is getting lower. So why China is vulnerable? The demographic time boom, population shrinking since 2022, working age population is failing fast, and fewer young people equal slower growth, as we can see from the data. Less consumption, more pension burden. Also, debt overhang. Local governments and poverty developers own trillions or maybe billions. Real estate has been 30% of the GDP, bubbled now, slowly deflating. Many of the real estate company in China got bankrupt and stuff like that. So also, debt limits ability to spend, reform, and stimulate. Stingy private sector. Business confidence is low post tech crackdowns because the Chinese market is unpredictable sometimes. So investor doesn't fear the control. Instead, they fear the unpredictability in the market. So business confidence is low, as you can see. Entrepreneurs worry more about policy shift than profit opportunities. State control creates stability, but also creates state risk taking. Uh, One more point. We can see the weak consumer demand in China. Young's unemployment is 20% plus, or maybe 30, and falling home prices has been shaking confidence. High savings, low spending, as I mentioned, is gonna weak domestic engine. Dual circulation strategy is not working fast enough.
Thank you, Mr. Attila, for that very insightful response. That is truly a deep analysis into China's sort of some of the stuff that China is will have to deal with in the foreseeable future. And before we move on to the next segment, to wrap up what Attila and Mr. Shazib Karim and Mr. Rishan Ali said, basically, despite China's headline-grabbing economic miracles, the facade of endless growth that China has shown historically has some deep fissures or has some challenges to it that we should address. And the most visible and urgent of these are is youth unemployment, which hit an all-time high of 21.3% in June 2023. And Chinese authorities obviously addressed it by encouraging youth to take on more non-conventional jobs. Also, that's one in five young people, graduates, engineers, and aspiring entrepreneurs were unable to find a job even after a college degree. So over 11 million students graduated in 2023, entering a job market already saturated with demand side weakness. And the problem with China is that the students are very smart. Many of them are overeducated for the available jobs. And as the economy grapples with this skills mismatch and slow private sector hiring, especially for tech companies impacted by recent crackdowns, this is something that China or the Chinese or China will need to address eventually, because there are a lot of smart students who are unable to find jobs because the internationally, due to COVID or even due to the Ukraine Russia war, many companies are not really hiring people anymore, and this is impacting the youth, specifically in countries like China or even in South Korea, where they're highly educated but are unable to find jobs. And this situation has led to the rise of the so-called full-time children trend, where young adults stay home supported by their parents, unable to enter the workforce. And this is beyond just a labor issue. It also speaks to a deep crisis of confidence among China's youth and their belief in upward mobility, especially after a generation that grew up in the golden years of China's growth. But youth unemployment is only one factor. There's also another factor that needs to be addressed, and that is the real estate sector of China, which was once the engine of the Chinese economy, is now in a somewhat slower motion. And the reason for that is because for years, property investment accounted for up to 30% of GDP, when including sectors like steel, cement, appliances, and services. And exceeded 90. Homeownership rates sort of exceeded 90%, and housing became the default investment vehicle for Chinese families, with real estate comprising nearly 70% of household wealth. But the model was unsustainable. Developers like Evergrande, Country Garden, and Sunak borrowed aggressively, using pre-sales to fund construction, effectively turning homes into a high-risk financial products. Evergrande alone defaulted on a $300 billion in liability, sending shockwaves across domestic and global credit markets. And government's attempts to deleverage the sector, such as the three red lines policy introduced in 2020, sort of worked in the sense that it aimed to cap borrowing relative to assets, equity, and cash reserves, but may have come too late. But it seems to be working in terms of leveraging the sector. Now, dozens of developers have defaulted or halted construction, which have sort of led to unfinished homes, speaking mortgage boycotts in cities like Zhengzhou and Xi'an, and land sales, which fund over 40% of local government revenues, have plummeted, creating a fiscal crunch and forcing Beijing to sort of reconsider how much it can afford to remain hands off. But to me, this isn't that big of a problem in the sense that Chinese economy is well off to sort of mitigate this kind of risk. Meanwhile, foreign investors are pulling out, and this is a problem that is seen not only in China but also in other countries in the region. And FDI into China fell 5.1% in 2023, but more significantly, foreign portfolio investment, which includes stocks and bonds, saw net outflows of over $100 billion, according to the IIF. And the CSI 300 index, which sort of tracks the major mainland companies in China, dropped around 15% in 2023. And major firms like Tesla, Apple, Samsung have begun de-risking their exposure in Chinese factories. And geopolitical uncertainty as well, growing tensions with other neighboring countries or even the U.S. Tightened capital controls and wave of anti-espionage crackdowns on foreign consultancies like Bain and Company and Mint have unnerved business community. The yuan is probably very strong, however, in the sense that the it's regulated by the Chinese government, and it is a very stable currency. However, it has slipped past 7.3 per USD, which has triggered the People's Bank of China's intervention to stabilize expectations and curb capital flight. And foreign chambers of commerce report rising concerns about sort of the data security issues and restricted cross-border profit repatriation. All of this creates a feedback loop of anxiety. As private confidence dips, firms delay hiring, consumers tighten spending, and local governments delay payments. China's consumer confidence index remains nearly a 30-year low, and the M2 money supply, though abundant in China, is not directly translating into credit expansion or even profit at this point. So, therefore, the velocity of money is falling, a sign that monetary policy is losing traction. Beijing has responded with targeted stimulus, including a 50 BPS cut in the reserve requirement ratio, property tax deferrals, and small business support. But it has so far avoided broad fiscal expansions, wary of reigniting asset bubble. So this is clearly at a point in time where China, even though it is probably one of the greatest economic miracles of modern world at this point, they are still facing some challenges when it comes to youth unemployment, when it comes to sort of the foreign direct investment, which is not in their completely in their hands, in the sense that the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine Russia war and other geopolitical conflicts impacted that. But mainly the concern is real estate and the youth unemployment. So with that being said, and finally, this is a question to Mr. Attila, Mr. Rishan Ali, or even Mr. Shazib Karim. With all the noise about foreign investors leaving, what do everyday Chinese companies think about international companies and globalization now? Mr. Rishan Ali, I see that your hand is raised. Would you like to chime in?
Um, yeah, so could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I think my internet cut off at the end. So,
Yeah, no, no, it was me, it was me, it was me,
oh,
but
okay.
I'm on.
So
Yeah, sorry.
basically, like China, like the problem that we are seeing economically is that due to like geopolitical tensions with its neighbors or even the U.S., foreign direct investment is being pulled out of China gradually. So do you think this is a concern for China in the foreseeable future? And what do you think Chinese citizens might think about international companies leaving at this point in time when there's a huge youth unemployment in China?
I think for China's um, foreign investment, I think will come back. I think they're gonna go through like maybe a sore patch right now, but I think the foreign investment will come pouring back into China once stuff starts settling down. And if it continues downhill for China, then it might be a pretty big problem, but I don't think that'll happen. I think China will recover.
Mr. Attila Akbar, would you like to chime in and maybe answer what do you think that China or the Chinese citizens think about leaving, about international companies leaving and foreign direct investment being impacted in China?
Yes, I just want to add some details to what Mr. Rishon said. So first of all, you have to think, what did the citizen think about the international companies in China? The mindset right now is basically, I think they will come, but not on the China's term. So they trusted if neutral and high quality. Brands like Starbucks, Adidas, Tesla, and Apple still have strong use bases in China compared to the old days. Criticize if political. H&M, Nike, or Western firms that commented on the other political issues. So yeah, and as you said, young people especially feel foreign companies must respect China and contribute, not criticize. And as we can see, the globalization is still useful, but not needs to benefit China. What most people think in China is they don't opposite globalization itself, but they think they still see value in global trade, investment, travel, and tech exchange. But there is a growing belief that China should benefit more fairly from it, because what they think is we opened it, we helped the world grow, and now it's time we lead. It's our turn. And writing national pride, support for Chinese lead globalization. Like, for example, people start purchasing more Chinese made product, or I think you guys heard the Xiaomi car and all that stuff like that. So globalization is fine for China as long as it doesn't come with lectures or a dependency. So China students still value what the world offers, but they're no longer looking up to it because the growth of China is at that point right now. There is pride, confidence, and sense that global integration must serve national goals, not challenging them. This is generally information only and not financial advice. So, and this is a really objective um, advice for me.
Thank you, Mr. Attila Akbar, for that very insightful response. I think the viewers can truly resonate, and coming from you as someone who has lived in China and also in the US, and thank you for that very objective response. So for Dollar Dialogue now, we will shift into a special segment, and this is the point in time where this is the middle part of our podcast where we do a special segment about not only about the economy but about the political economy or something that is related to sports. And for today, the viewers asked in a poll to talk about the Chinese football, Chinese football essentially, and how the Chinese football league is competing. So this is ideally like a short segment. So we'll like to talk about the rise and retreat of Chinese football, what has happened to the China dream. To understand the Chinese football league, we have to first rewind to 2015, and this is the peak of what many call the China football boom. And this is when China declared three national goals: qualify for the World Cup, host the World Cup, and win the World Cup. And the government followed up with a sweeping policy support. Football was written into school curricula, new stadiums were planned in every province, and over $2 billion flooded into domestic clubs through real estate firms, tech conglomerates, and state linked investors. The Chinese Super League, which is a CSL, exploded. Between 2015 and 2019, the Chinese Super League spent over $1.8 billion on transfer fees, rivaling European giants. Players like Oscar, who used to play for Chelsea, signed for Shanghai SIPG for $73 million. There was also other Brazilian legends like Hulk and Paulinho, and even Carlos Tevez, who reportedly paid $750,000 per week, made headlines. But here's the economic puzzle to it. Was this football or just finance? Many of the clubs were backed by highly leveraged conglomerates like Evergrande, Wanda, and Suning, whose real estate profits were redirected into high visibility sport assets. These clubs weren't profitable, they were vehicles for political capital, brand legitimacy, and sometimes offshore capital flight. Guangzhou Evergrande, for example, was co owned by the same developer that defaulted on the $300 billion in liabilities, and their football team served as a national prestige project, winning eight Chinese Super League titles and two AFC Champion League trophies between 2011 and 2019. But the model collapsed just as fast. By 2020, Beijing had imposed irrational spending regulations, capping foreign players' salary at £3 million annually, banning corporate names into club titles, and introducing strict financial sustainability rules. Suddenly, the cash sort of vanished. Players terminated contracts, team folded. Zhengzhou FC, the reigning champions in 2020, was just dissolved months after lifting the trophy. In 2023, only 12 teams remained in the Chinese Super League, down from 16 in 2019. Meanwhile, China's national team's performance is actually not that bad. It's actually decently good. FIFA ranking as of July 2025, it was 81. World Cup qualification, it's still elusive at this point in time. But despite numerous pending, grassroots development lagged. Many youth academies were rushed, underfunded, or built in cities with no football culture. Coaching staffs are often foreign, temporary, and disconnected from the local talent pipelines where they couldn't recruit local talents. And the result, no long term system, just short term spectacle. So, based on this, where does the Chinese Football League stand today? And do you think China might dominate the footballing scene in the sense that it dominates other sports like badminton or table tennis? This is a question to Mr. Attila, Mr. Rishan Ali, or Mr. Shazib Kareem.
Um, yeah, it's funny you bring up Oscar. I was devastated when Oscar left. I used to love him at Chelsea. But I think China's footballing program has a bit of a problem, which is uh it's they just don't win anything. They win the small things like the very small regional things like the East Asian Cup. They win sometimes. Their women's team do very well actually, but their men's don't end up doing very well. And I mean they have a ton of people, but they just don't seem to be able to get much talent out of them. They aren't they just lost to Indonesia, who just had a new footballing project as well, where they brought in a bunch of Dutch Indonesians. So China's not doing very well right now in the World Cup qualifiers. I don't think they'll make it, but they also have other sports going for them, like basketball. I think they're better at basketball than football, and they've had more stars from basketball than football. They haven't really had any like top big football stars in football. Sorry, yeah, big stars in football. So I think China will have success, and sorry, not will continue to have success in the Olympics and basketball, but I think football, if they do get to that level, is pretty far away.
Mr. Attila, as someone who is also very passionate and very talented in football, seeing you play football in the fields of Wharton myself firsthand, what do you have to say about Chinese Football League or even China's dominance in sports?
So, I lived in China for a while. Like, I grew up there, and I saw like what parents think about the sports, like soccer. So, I think the main point is the weak culture. Like, football isn't embedded into daily life. Like, you can see those videos from Instagram, like in Brazil, like in England. Or even now, Japan is having a great football culture. Like everyone is supporting culture. They they love the sports. So that's where you can see the passion about the people to this sports. So young's participation remains low, like relatively to China compared to the previous country that I mentioned. Because the main problem is parents often view football as too risky or unstable for serious careers. So as I said, as I grew up here, the many mentality of the parents is you should take the goal call, be a great student, have a good score, and find a good job. Like doing sports is shouldn't be your goal, or be like a soccer player or athletic shouldn't be your goal. You should have a stable job, stable life, stable family. So yes, and just as a soccer fan myself, as a football fan myself, if you look at the Chinese national team or soccer culture compared to the other countries, I can definitely see between a 50 years gap between China and the other countries like Brazil or England. So, as you mentioned, this is mainly caused by the corruption and mismanagement of the organization in China. For example, like years of fake scouting, match fixing, and uh, pay to play culture have left the sports broken at the roots. But also, you have to think about like 30 years ago, Chinese national team was really good. They were in the World Cup and playing. So I want to see is for the people, they saw a really like two big difference between the old national teams and the national team right now. So it kind of disappointed the people. So the supporting from the people is getting lower and lower.
Thank you, Mr. Attila, for that very insightful response. I see that Mr. Rishan Ali, your hand is raised. Would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if there is corruption, there you can get around corruption if your players are talented enough. Like the Brazilian, but it still comes back to haunt you, right? Like the Brazilian team, sorry, the Brazilian Federation is extremely corrupt. I mean, basically all the federations in South America, they're all extremely corrupt, but they all have a ton of talent, but they're still not doing very well in the big scene, except Argentina. But even Brazil recently has not been doing well. So I think a large part of that is their corruption. But I had a question for you, Attila. Do you think a big footballing star would help embed football into the Chinese culture? Because I assume after Yao Ming, basketball must have become much more popular in China and been like more ingrained in the culture.
Oh, okay, thank you. So, I mean, it's hard to tell, but partly yes, because China had some football stars before, and they played in the best league in the world, like for example, Premier League, La Liga, league like that. So yes, a big football star can have a short-term impact in Chinese football culture. As you mentioned, Yao Ming, he's a great basketball star, Hall of Fame and stuff like that, and it boosted the point of view of the Chinese people to basketball. Now, really young people, they love playing basketball. They participate a lot in it. So as I can see, it of course have a short term impact on Chinese football culture, but real transformation, it requires much more than a superstar, I think. And so I'll give you more details. So when players like Carlos Tevez, Oscar, or Hulik joined the Chinese Super League, tickets sales like everyone crazy watching the game, TV viewership, jersey sales crazy. A truly global name like Cristiano or Messi would dominate media and inspiring yours for a few years. because Messi, just example, Messi went to China 2023 trip, and it drew massive crowds even for explanation, proved that epicity exists. Raised professional standards. So big names players bring elite habits, training intensity, match prep, mental focus, and their presence can ride their bar in locker rooms, push domestic player, and challenge coaching staff. And also can bring global attention. A superstar draws young brands and sponsors, like clubs gain exposure that could attract foreign investments and partnership. But the real problem is not just about the star, it's about the system, like the broken young system, like the soccer system is. You can't build a football culture from the top to down, because if you want to have a good building that can last for a long time, you have to have a good foundation. You can't just start from the top, like top to the down. One start can't solve problems like rigged grassroots league or the fake games, whatever, like unqualified coach, like pay for play games. And if you say for short term, great, like you make money, like you get exposure, attention, but if you think for long term, most stars only stay for a few seasons and they're gonna leave. And if they see poor management, they lose motivation. And Tavis famously called his CSL stint a holiday. Like they just go there, make some money, and left after a poor performance. Also, lack of institutional reform. No star, no matter how great, can clean up corruption. It's impossible. Fix governance or create merit-based selection alone. So I don't think only a single, like a one or two star that they go to the Chinese league and get more attention will change like the roots of the football culture in China.
Thank you, Mr. Attila, for that very insightful response and for that real estate analogy about how the foundation is really important, or else the building will collapse. I think that was a really intelligent way to phrase that. So, to move on to the final segment of our podcast, we would like to talk about segment four, which is the value chain shift from made to created in China. So, for decades, the label made in China was synonymous with mass production, low wages, and supply chain efficiency. But today, Beijing wants to change the script. The new vision created in China, a strategic push to move up the global value chain, not just assembling iPhones, but designing them, not just exporting goods, but also exporting ideas, patents, and platforms. Because the truth is, the US is still the economic superpower of this world by a long shot. And the reason for that is because the United States have the best research facilities in the world. It is probably better than the European Union or even China or even other emerging nations like India. The US leads the world when it comes to innovation, when it comes to research, stuff like that, which is why the US is still the reigning economic powerhouse. And the reason China wants to change their script from made in China to created in China is to basically address just that. China has been historically a manufacturing based, but they now want to be seen as also as a country that is exporting ideas, research, patents, and platforms. And China's manufacturing value added reached $5 trillion in 2023, which accounted for nearly 30% of global total, the highest of any country. But officials in Beijing are well aware that scale alone doesn't guarantee economic security. Low margining assembly lines are vulnerable to supply chain diversification, US tariffs, which is something that is recently making headlines, and rising unit labor costs, which increased by over 140% between 2005 and 2022. And to escape the middle income trap, China launched Made in China 2025, which is a 10-year strategic plan aimed at upgrading domestic capabilities in 10 high tech sectors, including AI, robotics, aerospace, electric vehicles, biotechnology, and semiconductors. And the goal is to essentially reduce foreign technology dependence and transform China into an innovation powerhouse by 2049, which is the centenary of the People's Republic. And one of the most visible success has been electric vehicles or the EVs. Companies like BYD, NIO, and Zhengpen are not only dominating the domestic market, where the EV penetration exceeded 37% of all new car sales in 2024, but they're also sort of going global. If I'm not mistaken, BYD's net profit tripled in 2023, and its exports to Europe and Latin America are surging. Meanwhile, battery giant like CATL, which is the contemporary Amperex Technology Limited in China, controls over 35% of the global EV battery market, and it supplies to big companies like Tesla, BMW, or even Hyundai. And on the AI front, China is now producing more academic papers on artificial intelligence than any other nation. And I read in the New York Times that in total R&D spending in China for like academic papers on AI exceeded like over $400 billion, or 2.6% of GDP, which is like approaching US levels. And the number of patents that were filed by Chinese entities at the World Intellectual Property Organization, or the WIPO, hit 70,000 in 2022, which is more than double of that US. In semiconductors as well, the picture is a bit murky though. China imported, like if I'm not mistaken, around $500 billion or half a trillion dollars worth of chips annually, making semiconductors its largest import category, more than even oil. And in response, the government established the $50 billion China Integrated Circuit Industry Investment Fund, which is nicknamed the Big Fund in China, to support homegrown companies like SMIC. Yet, geopolitical restrictions like US export controls on advanced lithography equipment and chip design software have severely limited China's access to the 7nm and below process nodes. And despite this, Huawei's 2023 Mate 60 Pro shocked analysts worldwide by running on a domestically produced 7N chip, showing that progress, though behind the curve, is still happening in China. At the same time, there is a shift toward green technology exports. China produces nearly 80% of the world's solar panels, and its wind turbine firms like Goldwind and Envision are scaling globally. With carbon neutrality by 2060 as a national target, China has become the largest market and exporter for electric buses, heat pumps, and energy storage systems. But here's the tension: can an economy that still relies on state subsidies, state owned enterprise protection, and top down industrial policy truly become industry driven? Critics argue that innovation doesn't flourish under censorship, risk aversion, and the lack of IP enforcement. Others say that China's size, STEM talent pipeline, and long-term culture chart may allow chart a different path, a kind that authoritarian innovation model. With that being said, this is a question to Mr. Attila, or Mr. Rishan Ali, or Mr. Shazib Kareem, and the question is: can an economy like China, that still relies on like basically state subsidies, state-owned enterprise protection, and top-down industrial policy, can it truly become innovative driven? Because this is what we learned in economics class, and this is what we learned. I think Mr. Spivey taught us that it's that for a country to truly innovate, there needs to be some level of independence. For example, if the farmer wants to innovate his crops, but at the end of the day, the government just takes all of them, then he won't have any incentive to innovate. So therefore, there must be some level of market capitalism, and this is essentially what Adam Smith wrote about in his book. So this is a question to Mr. Attila or Mr. Rishan Ali. Do you think in a country like China, where state capitalism is basically the main form of the economy, even though China is capitalistic to some extent, it's still owned largely by the state? Do you think it can truly be innovation driven when it comes to AI, or when it comes to electric vehicles, or even when it comes to research papers?
I mean, China is investing very heavily into their innovation sector, and they are seeing a lot of results. They're seeing success in AI, they're seeing success in obviously the automotive industry. I mean, I live in England and I see BYDs everywhere in the UK. So they've made it to the UK market and made a quite a big impact. Like I used to see mainly Hondas and Teslas or Kias for the electric cars, but now BYD's in the mix and it's like probably the second most frequent one I see. So they've made a big impact on the UK car market, and it's gonna spread. So I think we'll see success in certain industries and paths, but um I don't think they'll ever take over the US, at least not for a while.
So he said a great point. I just want to add some details. So what I think it's also can be a positive signals is China's tech firms have produced global innovation in mobile payments and AI or e-commerce because e-commerce has a huge market in China. So also the government increasingly encourage indigenous innovation. Like I said, local people like to support the local product more in case to reduce dependence on foreign technology. China is developing an ecosystem where both state and private actors innovate a hybrid model so they can keep the balance together, though they don't lose foreign investors that much. And gradual reforms and the competition in some sectors are increasing innovation pressure. So in China, there's a lot of competition going on. It's really hard to get innovation, but it's still possible. So the question is, so can China become fully innovation driven? Um, so my point is, it's already a partially innovation driven, especially in digital tech and emerging industry. To fully transition, China would likely need to increase market competition, reduce SEO protection, where it still flies innovation, and let market forces play a large role in resource allocation and force it more open collaboration internationally, encourage a culture of risk taking and entrepreneurship. So what I think is China should give more power to let the markets phase, like let it work itself. They shouldn't control too many things. So, so in summary, China's model is unique, a blend of state guidance and emerging market in dynamism. While the state's heavy hand presents hurdles, China's scaled investments and growing private sector innovation make it a strong contender to become truly innovation driven by economy. It may not look like a classic free market innovation engine, but it's it's foregoing its own path. So yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you, Mr. Attila Akbar and Mr. Rishan Ali, for those insightful responses. And to wrap up our podcast for today, to answer the question of China's economic puzzle, boom, buster, reinvention, I think it truly requires a nuanced understanding. And that essentially brings us to the end of today's journey, from rice paddies to AI labs, from ghost cities to green tech, or even from made in China era to a new uncertain chapter of strategic recalibration. We have seen China, a country that pulled off the largest poverty reduction campaign in world history. We've seen China that built cities faster than maps could track. And we have also seen a China that became the factory, essentially the factory floor of the global economy. But we have also seen a China that has seen the fractures, generation graduating into unemployment, a real estate drowning in debt, and an innovation drive that runs into the hard world of geopolitics. And yet, China is still not collapsing, as some critics might say. It's adapting slower, but more inward looking, more cautious, but perhaps even more sustainable. And growth today, in an economic sense, is not only measured solely in GDP points, but also in resilience, diversification, and strategic autonomy. And China seems to be doing just that. And this isn't just China's story; it's a global one, because the ripple effects, essentially from like Bangladesh's garments factories to the German automakers, or even to Wall Street from the South China Sea. These things are real. And as China changes, so does the world. So, to you, the Dollar Dialogue listener, whether you're an aspiring economist, policymaker, or just curious about the forces that shape our time, the key takeaway from that podcast, from our podcast discussion today, is that China's complexity is not a weakness. Rather, its economy is growing, and it's not collapsing in real time. And China defies essentially the binary narratives, and it's contradicting that it's not collapsing. It's neither the next superpower nor a paper tiger. It's something in between, a country that's still writing its story. As of now, we cannot tell whether it will become the reigning superpower of the world yet. So, Mr. Attila, thank you for bringing clarity, perspective, and personal anecdotes and insight into today's conversation. And before we sign off for today, is there any final words that you would like to conclude to the viewers of Dollar Dialogue?
Um, so I think we covered most of the parts. So yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Attila. It was a pleasure. Oh, Mr. Vishan Ali, I see that your hand is raised. Would you like to say any final words?
Yeah, I want to say it was a pleasure to meet Attila, and nice to be on the podcast again with you, Arib. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Mr. Vishan Ali, and yeah, thank you for being our newest co-host, and thank you to all of the Dollar Dialogue listeners around the world, and thank you for tuning in today. And if you found this episode insightful, share it with a friend, drop us a rating, or even follow us on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, or any other major podcast stations around the world. Dollar Dialogue is up there. So until next time, and keep asking us better questions on the polls. Keep seeing the story behind the statistics, and that is this is it for today, and thank you for listening. See you in another episode with another very interesting topic and with another very interesting guest speaker. That's all for today. Goodbye.